So, when it comes to an NIH Career Development Award, what do you actually need to be successful? That is what we are talking about today. If you're new around here, my name is Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant, and my team and I help early career researchers get funded at NIH. So let's talk about what a successful application for a K award actually requires. And I'm going to talk about this in two different ways. One is the sort of pragmatic components of the application itself. And the other piece is how do you actually sort of put that together in a way that makes your grant competitive? So we've talked about this in a previous video, and what I just want to remind you of is the different components of the Career Development Award that need to come together and sort of fit together like puzzle pieces, right? So you've got the candidate component of your Career Development Award, where you are really presenting yourself and your potential to be a successful independent researcher, right? So you need to talk about yourself and where you see your research going and what kind of researcher you want to be, really. That's the candidate component. And again, really presenting your potential as a independent scientist. Then we have the research and training component, right? And so the what you need to be doing there is linking your previous work and sort of where you've come from and the training that you've done up to this point with where you want to go as a researcher in terms of your career goals, right? You want to talk about, again, where you're headed, where you want to be, what kind of impact you want to make. But then what's in between is the plan to actually do that, right? So there's going to be a training component to the K Award. There's also, of course, going to be a research component to the K Award. And in those components, you need to describe the goals that you have, right? What are your training goals? What are your research goals? And how are you going to achieve them? And then beyond the research and training elements, of course, there's the mentorship component. So how are your mentors going to help you get from A to B? And what is their expertise and experience and track record in mentoring others and in being able to sort of provide what you need to get where you want to go, right? So even in me just describing this, there are a lot of different moving parts to a career development award, right? And that is what can make it really, really tricky. Is you have to describe yourself as a candidate. You have to describe your training goals and your training plan. You have to describe your career goals and your research plan, and you have to describe the mentorship component. Those pieces all have to come together in a way that makes it very clear where you're starting from and where you're going to end up. And so those are the really those pragmatic components that you need to include in your career development award. So now let's talk about how do you actually do that? How do you actually put all those pieces together? My biggest piece of advice here is to get as specific as you possibly can about each of those elements, right? When you're talking about yourself as a candidate, how did you get to where you're at now? What is the training and the experience that you developed, and how is it informing where you want to go, right? Then when you're talking about your career goals, how are you planning to achieve your career goals? So from where you are now and where you want to go, how are you going to get there? And then you have to describe your plan to get there, right? So what is your training plan, and what are your goals for your training plan, and how will you know if you achieve them, right? And so beyond that, you also need to make sure that once it's clear to you, it can also be conveyed clearly to your reviewers, right? So in my view, the very first step is to get clear on that yourself, because if you're at all confused about how you're going to get where you're going to go or what your career development award is actually going to look like, it's going to be very, very hard for you to communicate that to anybody else. So step number one is really for you to get clear on what those different components are and get as specific as you can about each of those components, so that then you can incorporate that into the different elements of your application. Right? Thing number two that I really want you to think about is the amount of time that you're giving yourself to write this application. A lot of applicants, whether it's at the Career Development Award level or even further along when you're getting into research project grants, they tend to vastly underestimate how long it takes to write a really strong proposal. And especially with a K award, when there are so many different components that need to come together and come together in a way that is clear and cohesive and persuasive, you really, really have to think about your reader. Who is actually going to be reading this? And remember that they are reading it for the very first time, and they are not going to be familiar at all with the different components of your application or you as an applicant, right? And so it is very important to consider that as you are preparing your application. And one of the best ways to do that is to give yourself the time that you need to put yourself in your reader's shoes and kind of step away from the application yourself so that it's almost like you are reading it for the first time. So you can understand what that experience is like for your reviewers, right? That is crucially important. And tied to that, my third piece of advice here is to make a plan, right? It's not just about giving yourself the time, but it's about how you're using that time. And the stronger the plan you have to write a good K award, the better chances that you will actually execute that plan and follow through with giving yourself that amount of time that you need to do a good job so that you can explain things clearly and specifically. All right, so again, we have these sort of pragmatic elements of the K award application that need to come together. But the best way to do that, the way that will help you be successful, is by putting yourself in your reviewer's shoes and making the grant as clear and specific and persuasive as possible to them. And the way that you do that is by giving yourself plenty of time to put yourself in your reviewer's shoes and making a strong plan for your K award. So if you found this helpful, we have a K award self-paced course that can guide you through the process of writing a really strong career development award to NIH. If you want some more details about that, you can find that at the link underneath this video, and stay tuned for the next installment in our K award series.